Today we're making each element of eggs Benedict. So we're going to start with English muffin dough. I've got half of the flour, the yeast, and an eighth of a teaspoon of baking soda, which you just eyeball. The next step is to get the wet ingredients together. So I have the milk and the water, and the sugar and the salt. This needs to be heated to 120 to 130 degrees. It's important to use a thermometer here because more than 130 degrees and you'll definitely kill your yeast. Now that I've gathered all my ingredients, I'm going to stir up the dry ingredients to make sure that everything is evenly distributed. That way when I add in my liquids, I won't have a big clump of yeast or anything else. So add all the liquids to the stirred dry ingredient. You're going to put it in the mixer with the hook and you're going to bring it together. You'll probably have to scrape it down several times. So once everything comes together, you need to add the remaining 1.5 cups of flour because remember we only started with half of our flour. So add that in and mix that up and the dough will come together a little bit easier now. However, you're still going to end up with a wet and sticky dough at the end. So when the dough finishes, you have the choice of either putting it in the refrigerator in a greased bag overnight, or you can wait 45 minutes for it to double in size. But for us, with our time constraints at school, we are going to put it in this bag, leave it in the fridge overnight. Make sure that the dough gets oiled on all sides, otherwise it may dry out, making for some inconsistencies in the finished product. So push all of the air out of the bag, seal it, and refrigerate it. So this is what the dough looks like the next morning. It's got large air bubbles. In order to start our preparations, sprinkle cornmeal on a sheet tray liberally. And then we're going to put some flour on the table. Use a good amount because the dough is very wet. And go ahead and dump all of the dough out onto that flour and start pressing it into a disc. We're looking for about a 1/2 inch thickness. So once the dough is sufficiently pressed out to about a 1/2 inch thick, you're going to take a biscuit cutter or some sort of circle cutter. The size is about 2 to 3 inches, and cut out the English muffins. Be gentle with them, try not to misshape them because they should be round. So get those onto the cornmeal lined tray, and with the excess dough you're going to want to dust off as much flour as you can and then knead it into a ball. Try not to use too much flour because we want it to stay nice and moist, and then let it rest because the gluten will be a little bit agitated once you knead it, and it will be very springy, so you won't be able to roll it out immediately. You're going to have to give it about 5 minutes to rest, and then you can pat it out one more time. You can re-roll your scraps as many times as necessary. It should really only take 2 to 3 times. And once you've finished with all of your dough, if you have any scraps that are too small to cut out, just go ahead and shape them in a circle. By the time you're finished cutting out all of your English muffins, the first ones you did should be ready to start cooking. So go ahead and get a Teflon or nonstick pan on the heat, about medium to medium low heat, spray it with some Pam, and you can begin cooking. You're going to want to be real gentle when you move the English muffins to the pan so that they don't get stuck to one another or get stuck to the sheet tray, and just gently place them in the pan. You're going to want to cook each side for about 2 minutes. And it's real important that you watch the heat here. Remember I said medium or medium low because you want to make sure that the outsides are lightly golden browned after about 2 minutes on each side, but you want the inside to be cooked. And if you cook it too hot or too fast, then the inside's going to be doughy and you're going to end up having to put it in the oven to finish it off. Once the first batch is done cooking, remove them to a sheet tray and get a paper towel so you can wipe out the pan. That way you don't have any burned cornmeal stuck to the next batch of English muffins. So these are all of our finished English muffins, and use a fork to open them up. That way they have nice nooks and crannies on the inside for jelly and jam to stick to. Okay, it's time to begin our hollandaise sauce, which starts with clarified butter. So melt it down, make sure the heat is not too hot, and the goal here is to remove that 20% of water and dairy solids in butter so that you just have pure fat. You're going to be skimming the impurities off the top, and you might also see some brown bits sticking to the bottom of the pan, which are dairy solids, and you'll also see some steam coming off of it, which is the water evaporating. So you're going to remove all of that foam, and it's going to become clear just like this. Once your butter is clarified, you can just set that aside, and now we need to deal with the egg portion of the hollandaise, and that's the serious manual labor. So separate an egg. You can reserve the white for something else. We just want the yolk at this point, and that's going to be the emulsifier in our sauce. It's going to hold all of that butter and the flavorings together and make a delicious creamy sauce. So you want to add the water to the egg yolk at this point and whip it up. We're looking to add some air to it, get a little bit of thickness. Once that's incorporated, we're going to add just a little bit of vinegar. That acid is going to help with the flavor of the sauce, and also to make sure that that egg is coagulated, and it'll help in the cooking process here. It'll help it hold all the butter. So whip it up, and then we're going to put it over hot water, which actually I'm going to use our poaching liquid that we started earlier that has just a little bit of vinegar in 2 quarts of water, about a tablespoon worth. And I'm going to use the heat to cook my eggs and help thicken them up. So you're going to have to whisk very fast, and you can whisk over the heat for a bit and then remove it and go back. But the goal here is to not curdle the eggs. So you have to be very careful about how hot it's getting. Also make sure that the bowl is not sitting in the water. It should just be getting a little bit of steam. So make sure that your pot is not too full. So we're looking for this to whip and get very thick and opaque. And then once it's there, we're going to slowly add our butter. I'm going to start with a couple of teaspoons and whip that in. And I'm starting very slow because I don't want the sauce to break. And again, if you add too much butter at once, the sauce will separate and it's very hard to bring it back together. So go ahead and add another tablespoon or so of butter, whip it up, and you'll continue that until you've added all of your butter. If you get to a point where you feel the sauce is too thick, you can add a little bit of water to it. You can put it back on the heat a little bit. You'll have to use your intuition for it. So once all of the butter is in there, we're going to season it up. And you're going to want to keep your hollandaise sauce warm, otherwise it will separate. So I'm going to leave mine on the stove next to the poaching liquid, and I'm going to add salt and pepper and a few drops of Tabasco sauce. If you'd like to add herbs at this point, you can add tarragon. That will make a béarnaise instead of just a plain hollandaise. You can add other spices too if you want. So whisk in the seasonings and then set that aside. If you plan to leave your hollandaise for longer than a few minutes, you'll want to put it in a tall, narrow container so that it doesn't get a crust. So this is poaching liquid. It's about 180 degrees, and I'm using a spoon to guide my egg into the water so that it stays together better. You'll lose a good amount of white, and that's just the way it is. But if your water is boiling or simmering any more than just a few bubbles forming on the bottom of the pan, then you're going to lose a lot more white and your egg is going to be very misshapen. So the heat of the water is important. Once you get your eggs in there, you're going to want to skim the egg whites that have detached from the whole egg out of the pot so that you can see the eggs and work with them, to test the doneness as you go. I use my spoon to help guide the white back to the egg in hope that it will stay together a little bit better. So skim the whites off the top of the pot. And these eggs will take about 3 to 4 minutes, but you can cook them as little or as much as you want. It depends on the level of doneness that you desire. Once the eggs are complete, remove them to a plate, and that'll help eliminate some of the water because you don't want to put water on your English muffin. You're going to want to have ready the Canadian bacon to go on top of your English muffin, and you'll notice that I don't have any. I forgot. So don't forget your ham or your bacon or crab cake. You can really put anything on there. Make it your own. So top those beautiful poached eggs with your beautiful hollandaise sauce and enjoy, because this is a real treat. There's a reason why people don't make this at home. It's a lot of work. So enjoy, guys.